This is Z-List Doctor Who bore Toby Hadoke, and this is the Sirens of Time.
It's actually the Sirens of Audio.
Oh, it's based on the time, isn't it? Ah.
G'day audiophiles, this is the Sirens of Audio, the show that explores the universe of Doctor Who in the audio medium. I'm Dwayne.
And the one not breathing here is Philip. G'day, Dwayne. G'day, audiophiles.
That's an in-joke there, guys. We might keep that to ourselves. How are you? How are you going?
I'm
You're a little bit flustered.
It's been a shocking day, so I'm looking forward to just spending the night with you, Dwayne.
And our special guest, Toby Hadoke, who's coming on tonight.
And our special guest, of course, but yes.
It's all fun and games sometimes with the internet, but that's what you get, folks, in Australia. We're a little bit behind the rest of the world, and sometimes these technology things play up on us. But we're gonna get through it anyway, aren't we, Philip?
We are. We will always find a solution. We want no excuses, just solutions.
Okay. We're going to bring Toby on in just a second because I've got a few things that are sort of outside audio drama that I want to talk to Toby about. I want to talk to him about interviewing, and because with our randomizer, randomoids episodes, Philip, we constantly get Toby Hadoke's face popping up at us with Who's Round coming up on the Big Finish randomizer. It's not the randomizer, is it? It's the randomoid selectatron. We're going to talk to him about interviews and what makes a successful interview, because he's probably the face of Doctor Who interviews and has been for quite some time.
Certainly the voice.
Absolutely. So before we get to him, though, what I would like to do is jump down that rabbit hole. You going to come with me, Philip?
If I have to.
All right, let's go. Okay, so to get me sort of up to speed with today's episode, I've been re-listening to an old episode. Well, the first episode that Toby did with Big Finish that was released. He did do another story he mentioned in the extras, but Robophobia was released first. It was the very first Liv Chanka story, so Nicola Walker appeared in that in her first appearance, but it was a 7th Doctor story, so we're used to seeing Nicola with the 8th Doctor. But Toby had a massive part to play in Robophobia. How long's it been, Philip, since you've listened to Robophobia? Did you listen to that today too?
It's not actually been that long, because I went through wanted to listen to all the Dark Eyes and Liv Chanka's, so I actually started with Robophobia before I started on the Dark Eyes box set. So probably about 18 months, I guess. Okay,
so not too long in comparison to me. Also, some other shows that we're going to be recording soon. We've got another special guest coming on soon who's chosen a few stories for us, and we have got a Randomoids coming up very soon. And I've been doing my listening and research into those, and what I am discovering, both with Robophobia today and with one or two of the others that I've been listening to, is that I've been going into the extras, and with Robophobia, as a subscriber bonus, you got extended extras. So I downloaded that and gave that a listen to today as well. So do you often listen to the extras when you do your listening, Philip, or have we just got too much stuff to listen to bother with that?
No, I always listen to the extras. It's part of what I do.
You kind of have to, don't you? I kind of feel like it's not completely listened to if I haven't listened to the extras.
Yeah, I really thought when I listened for a second and third time I wouldn't, but I still do, which I don't know what that says about me. That's a bit of completeness, obviously. I mean, I'm happy to jump the theme song, but I have to listen to the extras.
Okay. What's interesting about going back to these old ones is that for the last, say, 6-7 years, the extras have taken on a pretty similar format, but back in those earlier years, when Nick Briggs first took over as executive producer, and he was very keen to put the CD extras on. They were a little bit different, and so the format was surprising to me that it didn't have the same background music. The interviews were a little bit more eclectic, shall we say, and I've been absolutely thoroughly enjoying these older extras that I haven't heard for many, many years, and there's some absolute gems in there, and I would certainly recommend anyone listen. Don't skip the extras, whatever you do. It's I think it's a vital component of the Big Finish audios. And when you look at comparable products from other companies, you're not getting anything like this. So as far as bang for buck goes, these extras on the CDs are incredible value, Philip.
Yeah, they really are. I mean, it's a lot of work. I'm often surprised that they did do them. I mean, I know Gary didn't do them because he didn't feel that they had time to actually do it, and so it wasn't one of Gary's priorities. But it was something that people kept calling out for when Nick took over. Nick insisted that every production had extras added to it. But I do think it is a big strain on resources to get the interviews done and put them out. But yeah, you're right. There's absolute treasures there, and especially certain cast members who are no longer with us, being able to hear their voices and reflections. It's a special moment. Absolutely.
So that's just my 2 cents worth on the extras and how vitally important I think they are, and how valuable I think they are as a piece of content on our Big Finish audios. I think they're fabulous. So I rarely miss them. I only miss them if I'm really, really pushed for time, and I've got to listen to a couple of things. But brilliant stuff. Brilliant stuff.
It is indeed.
All right, we'll get out of the rabbit hole and let's throw in a trailer for Robophobia right here, and then we'll be back in a second with Toby Hadoke.
Coming soon from Big Finish Productions, Doctor Who, Robophobia.
Ah, memory.
What? Who the hell are you?
Just passing through.
It was eventually discovered that the robotics genius Taron Capel had smuggled himself aboard the Sandminer, assuming the identity of a crew member.
So you're saying you don't like robots?
No. I'm not saying I like them or don't like them.
Robots! Killing people!
This must have been hushed up by the company.
Yeah. And how many robots have we got stored on this ship?
Oh, hello.
Who are you?
Oh, I'm just having a look around.
What did he mean? A robot interfering?
What indeed?
What are your orders, Controller?
No! Keep away from me!
Still think there's a murderer on the loose then? Ever considered that it might have been a robot?
No.
What is it?
Seems the rumours were true, Chief.
What rumours?
Oh, this is a severed robot hand. And they fought to the last man against the terrible robotic foe.
Doctor, will you just stop being mysterious for one moment and tell me what the hell is going on?
Subscribers get more at bigfinish.com.
Joining us on the Sirens of Audio is a man who needs no introduction. He hasn't done too many podcasts in the past, I don't think. It's Toby Hadoke.
Oh dear, yes. I'm in danger of becoming ubiquitous, but hello.
Thanks very much for coming on.
That's my pleasure.
I was compelled to reach out to you because of the recent Sixth Doctor release, Waterworlds, which had a bonus story on the end of it called The Dream Nexus, and the person who was reading it was your good self.
Yes.
So, it's been a while since I've heard anything from you on Big Finish. So how was that experience for you?
That was lovely, and it's funny because I've done quite a lot for Big Finish, but it had been a while, and of course, as a self-absorbed pessimist, you sort of go, "Oh God, have I done something wrong? Do they hate me? Oh no!" And of course, it's just because you're one of many millions of actors, and I've done plenty, and I've had plenty of opportunities, and I should be happy. But you go, "I know, I just assume that it's all gone wrong, and everybody hates me or thinks I'm rubbish." So very nice that it's not the only thing I did in that sort of period. It was done very recently, actually. So I've got a couple of other bits and bobs with them that haven't been announced yet. So it was part of what didn't happen in a vacuum. It was Jack Rayner just sort of reached out and said, I think you'd be a good voice for this and something else. Would you do it? And I was fortunate that rarely for me. I quite early on during lockdown, I built myself a studio here where I am now. In fact, I built it in this room, and it wasn't right because it was close to the main road. So then I relocated it to the back of the house, and I brought I set up a proper microphone and did all of that because of the work I do for the BBC. And I sort of jerry built it really, and the Beeb got back and said, that's really good. That's broadcast quality. And I went, is it? Oh, I'd sort of done it for my podcasts, mainly. But I said to the Beeb, well, I'll try with this to see if that'll work. And it worked. So I was very happy with that. So I think Jack must have known, or maybe I'd said something, and so I did it. Yeah, I did it from home. But I've done Radio 4 plays from home. It's the new way of doing things. I've worked with some marvelous actors on radio. People say, "What was Toby Jones like?" And I'll say, "I've no idea really, but I can tell you what his bedspread looks like," because we were all on Zoom. So what you lose from the green room experience, you gain from the fact that you can do it in your pajamas.
So how did you approach the Dream Nexus as an audiobook as opposed to an audio drama? What kind of different approach do you need to take?
Yeah, well, it's and I have to say it was lovely to see the writer's name on it, Adam, because we have actually met. He reached out to me years ago when because I didn't really know any Doctor Who fans when I did my one-man show, Moths Ate My Doctor Who Scarf, and I think he reached out on Facebook and said, "Look, I live not far. Do you want to meet up for a coffee?" And we met up and had a chinwag. And I saw him a couple of times then, and I think he must have moved away or something. We remained in Facebook touch, but I've not seen him for years. And so it was lovely to see that. And then he sent me a thing on a public message on Twitter saying, "Oh, I'm excited about the thing." And of course, we couldn't talk about it at that point. So that was all exciting. So that felt nicely right. So I felt comfortable that if I had any worries, I could talk to Adam. I didn't in the end. I just unlike a drama, when you play a part in a story reading, of course you have to have lots of different voices for the different characters, but it's a mistake to go the full pyrotechnics because it looks like you're showing off. So if you're playing somebody with an accent, I think you do a shade of an accent. If you're doing, I could have worked much harder on a fully fledged Colin Baker impersonation, but what instead you do is it still has to be recognizably you reading it. Otherwise it's distracting for the listener, and it still has to have your own sort of intonations, but you just give it a little bit of Colin in places. Wise. I don't know, you sort of do it in situ, but without ever losing your own sort of timbre and stuff like that. So then it's just a case of, especially towards the end when more characters come in, remembering what voice you've given to which character. But again, it's not a fully fledged impersonation. It's the essence of that person through the sort of prism of your own larynx, if that's not a terribly mixed, I don't even know if it's a metaphor, but mechanical description. And other than that, I remember doing a lot of. I've done a lot of Radio 4 plays, and quite often, you end up you're the lead character. You end up as the sort of narrator as well. But I remember the first time I did some of that, I thought the way to do it was to be terribly serious, and the producer went, "No, you really need to, give it a lot more sparkle and a lot more undulation, and so you actually need to be quite animated." So I always remind myself to sort of keep my eyes wide open and to sort of attack it a little bit, because if you just rely on voice, it can get very dull for the listener. So you have to sort of attack it, but again, without sounding like it's a barrage for the listener. So it's just sort of how you pitch it, really. But it's really nice to do. It's my perfect thing, really. I really enjoy, because you create all that. You get a sense of what you hope the writer wants the character to sound like, and then you sort of half create that character, hourly, and it's really satisfying when it sort of all lands together, when you feel that you've created a sort of sound for the various different characters, and you've done the world just with your own voice, and when you finish it and you go, oh yeah, that all seemed to fit together, because it's just you, really. And I had Jack sort of directing and another Jack who's the very helpful tech fellow. But it's just you in a cupboard. But I really enjoy it. I thought it was great fun.
In your preparation, do you keep notes in terms of what characters sound like? Is there a way you cue yourself to remember what the characters spoke like?
No, apart from only mental notes. You go through it and you go, okay, well, I'll give that character a bit of that and that character a bit of that. But I'm not a great one for writing things down anyway. That doesn't mean I don't do preparation. But I find that sort of the writing down process a bit tedious. So I tend to go for sort of instinct and practice, and leave it at that. But when you read through it the first time, I sort of alight upon a voice for each person, and then you might find two of those people talking to each other, and you go, oh, that doesn't quite sound right, so I might need to give one of them a slightly different voice, and then you go back and do it again. Because again, there's only sort of marginal differences between the voices, so they just have to have a couple of distinct aspects to them in order to separate them from each other. But because it's only marginal, you then have to make sure that when two people are talking to each other, it's not too marginal, or you're marginal in the wrong way. But so just tiny little bits of sort of sleight of hand, really.
Hebe took the spoon and turned it over in her hands. It was bright silver, brand new, a souvenir teaspoon with commemorative enamel at the end of the handle. She tilted it in blue-red twilight to get a better look. Llandudno Pier, Wales, she read. Grand opening, 1st of August, 1877. Now that was a nice day out, the doctor said, taking the spoon back. He breathed on the back of it, rubbed it on his lapel, then began to use it to dig into the loam. You know, I've always had quite a respect for the kingdom of fungi, he said. Extracting a firm plug of soil, he stabbed it with the spoon and held it up. The loam was dark, threaded with bright white fibres. The mycelium, said Hebe. 90% of the fungus is underground, and these, she looked up at the stems towering around them, are just the fruiting bodies. She looked at the doctor. So? The doctor straightened up. You don't understand. He gestured around the clearing with the spoon. It's not just this one spot. This entire planet is covered with this fungus. Mel frowned. What? All of it? All of it, said the doctor. One single organism, covering one entire world.
I think I read in Vortex magazine that you had mentioned to Kenny there that it was a thrill for you to do this story because Colin Baker was the first Doctor you ever met. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, I'll have to read Vortex magazine. Have I spoken to Kenny? God, you see, I forget everything. Yes, Colin Baker has a very special place in my heart because he was the first Doctor I met. They say never meet your heroes. Well, they couldn't be more wrong if your hero happens to be Doctor Who, Colin Baker. He was in a play at the Grand Theatre Wolverhampton called Corpse. It was him and Jack Watling, of all people. And I went to see it, and I knew of this thing of going to the stage door to meet actors, but I didn't really know what it meant. But I was with an older, bolder friend. And so we went round the back, and actually it wasn't the stage door that we went through, it was the scenery dock, because it was open on the back street. So we ended up on the stage. Now, of course, I since know now that the stage door is not the stage, it's just a back entrance to the theatre where you stand and where the actors come out. But that's not where we went. We went literally through a stage door, ended up on the stage, and this woman said, "Oh, can I help you?" And my friend, very bold, said, "Yes, we're here to see Mr. Baker." And she said, "Is he expecting you?" And he said, "Yes." And I was like, "Okay." And she knocked on the door, and he said, come in, and opened the door. And instead of going, "Who are these two?" he went, "Oh, hello, yes, come in." And it's just like, "Oh, okay, that's very nice of him." Didn't take a backward step at all, or give away the fact that we were essentially trespassing. And I said, "Could I come back in a couple of days and interview him?" And he said, "Of course I could." So I came back a couple of days later with my cassette recorder and interviewed him right up until, and it pains me now, because you can hear the tannoy going, "Mr. Baker, this is your half-hour call." And at that point he goes, "Which means you've only got about 5 minutes. I hope that's okay." And I was like, yeah. Because I since, again, know that in theatre the half-hour call means this is where you get into costume. And he had to get into a big, extravagant drag costume and makeup. And we carry on, and then you hear the 5-minute call, and I'm still there. And he still took time to see me out. And I was a nervous, 13, 14-year-old. This was terrifying to me. I'd never met anyone famous, particularly, I don't think. Certainly not a Doctor Who. And I've seen him since with nervous kids, 8, 9-year-olds, and he is so good with them. I am full of admiration for the way that Colin Baker is with his charges. And yes, and in terms of the big finishes, if you'll notice, I've done quite a lot with Tom Baker. I've done a Peter Davison. I've done a couple of Peter Davisons. I've done a Sylvester McCoy. So the only classic Doctor I've not done big finishes with is Colin. So it was nice to even though it's slightly different, it's nice to add him to my big finish over because he has a very special place in my heart.
So even though you'd done some Jago and Lightfoot, you never crossed paths with Colin there because there was a bit of crossover there.
No, I didn't. No, sadly not. So near and yet so far every time. Yeah. And in fact, also he was the only Doctor on the BBC range whose stories I'd never done a commentary on either. But you'll find this hard to believe, but actually on the BBC range, up until the ones I did with Tom Baker very recently, where it's just me and Tom, I'd never done a commentary with a Doctor on the BBC DVD range.
Is that right?
Which seems mad because I've done so many, but not. I've never done any with a Doctor. But on the season 22, I have actually done Revelation of the Daleks with Colin, so we're together at last. But no, on the BBC DVDs. So take the Blu-rays out of the equation. Of all those commentaries I do, there's not a Doctor on any of them.
Wow. Well, since you brought the commentaries up, let's talk about them. I've been collecting the DVDs right from the very beginning, and made sure I got every single one that was released. There was a time there in the commentaries where, particularly with the older stories that were being released, that some of the cast and actors were. The cast and crew were being left to their own devices, and the commentaries seemed to me to be a little bit needing of direction. Is that why I think Gary Russell was one of the first ones that was brought in? Is that why you were brought in as well to help moderate those? Were they having trouble remembering those times?
Well, I think you just have to. Opinion is divided, and I think both opinions are perfectly acceptable. And I certainly, at the beginning, was like, why do they need a moderator? I just want to hear the people. But that's self-loathing and me going, but fans aren't proper people. Fans shouldn't be doing things. Whereas, Gary Russell is a professional, a knowledgeable fellow, and Clayton Hickman too. And they were the moderators. And then Andrew Cartmel did the Sea Devils, I think, which was an interesting choice to go, well, let's get somebody from a different part of the series to do it. I thought that was quite a smart move. But you see, on the Sea Devils, they have the same 3 guests. I think it's Terence Dix, Barry Letts, and is it maybe Michael Bryant for the whole 6 episodes. And I think it was John Kelly who sort of went, well, actually, people are contracted by the episode. So why don't we mix it up a bit? And I think that's actually much more interesting. And I did see a fan complain on the Dominators when I think Fraser Hines isn't on episode 3, and they go, but we missed his memories of episode 3. It's like he barely remembers the 5 weeks. He hasn't got a memory specific to week 3 of making the Dominators. He really hasn't. And so what happened was, the way that came about was that, I used to get a bit cross because there's an example in, I think, Planet of Spiders, where Nicholas Courtney and Elizabeth Sladen think Gareth Hunt is Gareth Thomas, but they never say the name of either of them, and they go around the houses of going, I think it's that bloke from that series, and Elizabeth Sladen go, oh yes, I know who you mean, and not one person's going, it's Gareth Hunt from the Nescafe advert, or from the Avengers, or New Avengers, or whatever, and it would just take somebody to go, it's not that, it's that, and they'd go, oh yeah, okay, and they'd be back on track. But instead it wastes a bit of time going nowhere, and the listener is none the wiser. So and that makes me uncomfortable as a listener, as well as annoyed if something isn't corrected that's wrong. But that's a different thing. And mistakes are always made. But I think somebody just to help people when they're not quite sure, is useful. But I'd never have pitched myself to do it. And what happened was when the War Machines came out, I was a bit annoyed because there wasn't a making of, and the commentary only had Michael Ferguson and Annika Wills on 4 episodes, and quite a lot of the cast was still around. And I just started to get to know somebody who worked on the range, and we'd go out for a drink every now and again. He'd come see my one-man show, and he lived not far, and we met up, and I said, I'm just a bit annoyed that Alan Curtis and John Cater weren't on the War Machines commentary. And he said, I think, whoever put that commentary together probably assumed they were dead. And I went, they're still in spotlight. They're still acting, for goodness sake. It's not hard. Do you know what I mean? Not hard to... I'm not talking about doing sort of epic level delving here. Come on. And he said, would you ever fancy moderating a commentary? And my answer was, it's some people practice their Oscar speeches. I used to practice moderating DVD commentaries because I thought I'd quite like to do it, but I never assumed, as I say, because I was never part of any sort of fan setup or anything. I was never part of fandom, really. And I said, yeah, I'd love to. And he gave my name to John Kelly, who was thinking as he was approaching the Rescue of the Romans, going, I've done some of these with the older people before, and they do need somebody to sort of steer them. Really, it's not fair on them to sort of anchor the conversation, but then it can meander if you don't have somebody anchoring it. So when you've got something like the Twin Dilemma, when Kevin McNally's on it, he sort of takes that role. He's brilliant in that he goes, okay, well, what I'll do is I'll ask Colin and Nicola some questions and sort of keep it flowing. And because he's a pro, and he's much younger, but for some of those earlier ones, I think they thought they need a bit of help, and I did a few of those, and then they decided, actually, this is quite useful. Let's increase the amount of turnaround that we have, so we don't have the same people on all the episodes, but that means we need a sort of constant who knows what's been referred to last episode, who knows what to pick up on, and blah, 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 blah. And so it just happened that every one I assumed would be my last one, and I ended up doing God knows how many. And Mark Ayres occasionally came in and did some, because we do some where we did 3 in a day, and I certainly also don't think I had any right to have the monopoly on it. So I know that occasionally they brought in Nick Pegg or Mark Ayres just to mix it up a bit, because, as I think I'm probably proving now, you can have too much of me. And but I was very lucky. I got to do far more than I thought, and I got to do a broad spectrum of it. And I was able to occasionally go, if that story's coming up, that's a particular special one for me. But also I helped them with the, I didn't just turn up on the day when a story was coming up. And still happens now. I'm just about to do something on this story, who's still alive and where are they? So I do a sort of bit of unpaid, uncredited sort of, background actor finding, because that's all in my head anyway. So I'm sort of part of the process from quite early on, even if I'm not actually going to end up doing the thing itself. I just like to be helpful. I like to be involved, and to make it all as good as possible, and to have as many people. I think it's important to get the testimony of as many people as possible. So if there's a story coming out for the Blu-ray range where there's already a commentary with all these people on, but they want to do a little documentary or whatever, say, well, that person wasn't on the disc first time round, you should try and get them or whatever.
Just wondering, in terms of your knowledge is huge in terms of Doctor Who. So how did you first start gathering this knowledge together? Why have you gathered so much? I was listening today to your Too Much Information podcast, episode 6 of the Daleks, and you're going into this amazing detail about 2 actors who don't even exist anymore or can't be tracked down. What was it that gave you this passion to start doing this fine research and so much detail?
It's funny because I don't think of it like that, because there are proper researchers. People like Matthew Sweet is a proper journalist. Simon Guerrier is a proper writer. I'm a lovey with an iPhone, and it all came to me from. I never consider myself to be an historian or a scholar or any of those sorts of things. But I do get quite carried away, And it all stems from when I was a kid. Again, I didn't think I was researching. I was just trying to get as close to Doctor Who as I could. And when I was a kid, when Doctor Who wasn't on, you had to fill your time, and I wanted to fill my time with Doctor Who somehow. And one of the ways of doing that was to sort of get hold of Doctor Who magazine. I couldn't afford to subscribe or anything like that. We didn't have any money, but occasionally, one would come your way. Somebody at school would have one that they'd give you, or a relative would buy you one as a present, or you just come across one at a junk shop or whatever. And the Doctor Who episode guides had the cast lists in. And one of the things I would do, because I had the Target novels, they were the one things I did have access to, because I've got older brothers, and because they were what people knew to buy. If I got book tokens for Christmas or whatever, that was a fairly easy way of accruing Doctor Who knowledge. So I'd know the stories and I'd read the characters, but I'd sort of want to know. I'd know that those characters were played by actors, and those episode guides would give the cast lists. So I would read over those, and I wouldn't actively learn them, but the way that my mind is, those things stick in my memory in the way that what I've got to do this afternoon doesn't, and how to wire a plug doesn't. But I can remember actors' names, cast lists, whatever. And as I say, I didn't sort of sit and study them at all, but I enjoyed reading them over and over again, and that they just sort of stuck in. So what would then happen then is that, and this was in the day when television credits were readable and went through at a legible speed that showed respect for the people who were being credited. I know, old-fashioned times. And acknowledging people's artistic endeavour and hard work was something that you just did in a civilised cultural environment. But let's not get into that. And so I would watch programmes, I would watch telly. I lived out in the countryside in the middle of nowhere. There wasn't an awful lot to do. So I watched, and my mum was pretty liberal about what we were allowed to watch. So I, stayed up and watched everything. And I would read the cast lists. And if I saw the name of an actor that I recognised from a Doctor Who cast list, I'd sort of go, oh, so that guy played that. He played, whatever it was, Damon in The Underwater Menace. So then I'd know what Damon in The Underwater Menace looked like. So I then started looking out for I just would read the cast list. It was a joke in my house. You can't turn over until Toby's had time to read the cast list. And I mean, when they started moving quicker, I would pause the cast list. I still sort of do. So that I built up a sort of database in my head of, who these actors were. And I noticed that if I flicked through my mum's Guardian, occasionally there'd be, obituaries in the back, and sometimes actors would pop up in those. So I started noticing that. And I just... these things would sort of leap out at me, and they would stay in my sort of mental storehouse of what actors did what, and the stuff that you learn when you're young stays there, and so it seems to, so far, it's sort of still mostly there. I mean, it's not as good as it used to be, and for things like that podcast, Too Much Information. I mean, I do pour through paperwork, and I have to do a lot of the work fresh, and I have to double check some stuff. But I quite like the one you refer to. There's a whole section on 2 actors that I don't know what happened to them, but I think that's quite interesting in of itself, and the fact that we found out a couple of bits, and there's a couple of tantalizing bits of information here and there. I find the whole archaeological process as interesting sometimes as just having the full facts at our disposal. I find it quite interesting that, all of us who are really familiar with Doctor Who, there are a couple of characters that we watch, and, those guys, they're there at a milestone in Doctor Who history, the first Dalek story, and I don't know if they're alive or dead, and they're not extras, they're, supporting credited actors, but those, 4 weeks of their life are there preserved in monochrome forever and ever and ever, and there they are. And there was real to them as you two are to me now, palpable, and you could see it in full colour. And they lived their lives beyond that, and I don't know what those lives were or what they did. And there's also the tantalising chance that they could be out there now. I could have sat next to them on the bus, And in fact, I have tried to track actors down before, and eventually I tracked down an actress from the 1954 version of 1984, who was a child actress in that. And I finally tracked her down to Canada, and I did a Zoom call with her. And it turned out that her nephew is a stand-up comedian who stayed at my house, who I've known for about 20 years. But I'd never thought to ask him, do you have any relatives who were in landmark BBC productions in 1954? Do you know what I mean? Because you wouldn't. So, sometimes the world is very small, and sometimes all you have to do is mention an actor to somebody, and you get a lead. I remember at the end of the Reign of Terror commentary, Timothy, we'd just done it, and we'd actually struggled to get people. And so in episode 6, we got the guy who played a soldier, but we hadn't got Napoleon. And Tim Coombe then went, oh yeah, Tony Morley played Napoleon. I'm still in touch with him. It's like, oh, why didn't you tell us when we rang you to do this? Because he would have been really handy. And we hadn't known where he'd retired from acting not long after the Reign of Terror. And in fact, John and I then went and did an interview with him on camera, which had never been used for anything. So maybe that can be used for the because he's dead now, for the Blu-ray. We future-proofed him, if you like. But it was just, if we'd thought in the email to go, and by the way, but you don't think to go, and by the way, here's some of the actors that we don't know what became of them. Do you know? But sometimes you need to prompt people, because they Tim Coombe just probably assumed, we got a contact for him or whatever, which we hadn't. So there's a lot of luck, there's a lot of coincidence, but that's all quite exciting anyway. In the one that I did about the Coal Hill school kids, where I tried to track down all of the extras from the very first episode. They're the same in the pilot, and the first one of those I didn't know where 2 of them were, and I thought I'd never have a chance of finding either of them. And then at that time I'd only got 70 patrons, and one of them went, oh, actually that one that you can't find, it's because his surname's spelled slightly differently, and his widow owns a pub that my parents are regulars in. And you just get, of all the chances because that was a patron-only release as well, so only 70 people listened to it. So of the 70 people that could possibly have listened to it in the entire world, one of those 70 was the person that had a lead to that person. So that left me with one Coal Hill school kid to find, and I've since found her as well. So, but that's part of it. That's quite fun. I like all of that.
Wow, that's fascinating. I was actually watching another podcast. They were doing a live YouTube that you popped up in yesterday, by the way, the Missing Episodes podcast.
Yeah,
and you were talking about some of those older episodes. You made mention of the Underwater Menace, and how it's been derided by fandom for all these years until we saw episode 3. Was it episode 3 that was found, or episode 2?
Episode 2 was found. We always had episode 3. Yeah.
Yeah. So episode 2, and there are some pretty good things in there to explore. So that got me thinking. Since we're talking about interviewing people, I was actually asked by Loose Cannon many years ago to interview Joseph first. So I think I was one of the only ones. I was one of the only ones to ever interview him, and that was an absolute thrill for me. And the most thrilling stuff didn't actually even get recorded. It was when he took us out to lunch and he was talking to us about how he was performing in Austria in theatre, got a knock on the door, and someone wanted to congratulate him on his performance. It was Hitler. So the fascinating
Wow.
stories from him, and he died not long after. So I felt really privileged for that. But is there any interview that really stands out to you as a real wow moment for you?
I love you for doing that Joseph first interview. I think it's so amazing that we've got him, and I love, and that just goes to show the importance of that, of getting the testimony of those people. Because as you say, he died not long afterwards, and there would have been a time when that would have been deemed impossible. Oh, interviewing somebody who's abroad, that we can never do that. But I'm so glad that you did that, and I'm so glad that we have that on record, because it's sort of only through Doctor Who that a lot of these people get to tell their stories. And I found with doing my Who's Round podcast that frequently the most interesting stories they would tell would be nothing to do with Doctor Who at all. There was a guy called William Herndell who was Ike Clanton in the Gunfighters, and he's not very good in the Gunfighters, and he had an acting career that he, I think, got more through chutzpah than acting prowess. He did a lot of model work and advert work. He was quite a handsome devil, but he had a fascinating life. But it was a bit like you say, a lot of the best stuff happened off mic. So I went to see him, and he said, "Well, I'm not sure this is interesting. Let me talk you through this." And he started telling me some interesting stuff. I said, "Can I just record this? He said, yeah. Well, we'll do it. But I just want to. And so he told me this fascinating stuff. And then we came to record it. And there was a lot of, well, yeah. And as I said to you, and he'd give you a truncated version. You go, well, no, but you said it to me off mic. So actually with him, what I did was, because at the end, he lived a very interesting life, and he lived in Thailand at the time. And he wanted somebody to write his memoirs, which I knew from bitter experience would be lovely for somebody like me to read, but would never get a publisher and would be too hard to do. And I was busy enough as it was. But because he'd been in Carry On, and because he was quite a cavalier, he'd lived a very interesting life. I thought he might chime with a friend of mine called Rob Ross, who has written books on comedy and is a bit of a roister-doisterer. So I said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't I introduce you to my friend Rob, and we'll do this all over again? Because part of me thought, well, he might be able to help Rob with Carry On stuff because he'd done a Carry On film. But it means I'll get another shot at this interview where he can tell Rob what he's told me, but it'll be like for the first time. So we actually reconvened a couple of weeks later, and I interviewed him twice because essentially I thought he was so fascinating. And on that first day, the bits that we recorded were, the bolt had been shot, as it were. But he married a witch. He saw Errol Flynn play chopsticks on the piano with a piece of his anatomy that tends to have more limited uses than that.
Hey, I'm in Tasmania. I know all about that.
Well, there we go. Oh, Tasmania, because Pamela Ann Davey, who was in Power of the Daleks, lived in Tasmania.
Did she?
I interviewed, yeah, she's sadly gone now as well. I interviewed her over the phone a couple of times. She was in Tasmania, bless her. And he invested in a nudist island that turned out to have nuclear waste infecting the water or something, and lost £10 million. He'd lived a really interesting life that was far more interesting than anything he had to say about the gunfighters, So I liked that one, but I also very impressed with the caliber of people that I got. I loved Henry Wolfe, who played the Collector in The Sunmakers, who'd had such an interesting life. He'd been to school with Harold Pinter. He'd worked with some of the greats, and was a lovely, humble man himself. But that was a really weird one, because I'd written to him and he wrote back to me, and then I'd moved, and I went to collect the post from this place I'd moved, and found this letter from him that he'd sent me ages before. So anyway, I rang him up and said, oh, could I interview you? And he said, yeah, absolutely. So I interviewed him over the phone in Canada, and then he said, I'm coming to London soon. In fact, my bags are packed. I fly after this. And I was like, but I go to London twice a week. So the interview with him is over a scratchy line on Skype from Canada. But then we met and had supper and just chatted, because I didn't feel I could ask to interview him again. So I just chatted to him and bought him supper as a thank you. About 3 weeks later in London, which seemed a really roundabout way of doing it. But if he hadn't mentioned during the phone call that he was going to be in London, that would never have happened. But the sort of people that and again, a lot of the things that he told me over dinner were probably more fascinating than what we did in the interview. But that happens so often. And sometimes you think, I need to come back and actually record some of this. Go, he said, blah, 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 because you forget as well. You forget. I've, so many, but Henry Wolfe, I just thought was such a lovely man, and had touched, so many great figures. And William Herndale, just because all of his stuff came so out of left field. That was not what I was expecting when I went to see a guy who'd done a few acting roles in the 60s. I wasn't expecting his life to be this sort of catalogue of adventure and high rolling, and kind of, he was a bit of a chancer, I think. I think his entire life had been, which included his acting career, had been kind of getting to know the right people, being a bit of a mover and a shaker, which means that he had some success, but it also was quite a perilous path to have trodden. But fascinating, yeah. And people are interesting, aren't they?
Sure are. What makes a good interview?
That's a good question. I think just no agenda, and I think I've been lucky because by and large, even though, again, I was surprised by some of the people that said, yes, you meet actors, and this is a salutary lesson. I met with actors who I thought would have no time to talk to me because they're busy or just too grand. And most actors feel that their career has been a failure. I discovered that one quite early on. And you go, but hang on, you did all of that. And they're like, yeah, in 1979. That's a long time ago. And you assume that people are always working. And in fact, I interviewed recently, it's not just actors. I interviewed recently somebody who's not been on any of the DVDs and Blu-rays. And then, again, just by coincidence, a chap on Twitter who I occasionally back and forth with, a lovely fellow who I've never met, just dropped in that this Doctor Who designer, he used to go to school with this Doctor Who designer's son, I think. And I said, we've been trying to find him. We've never got him for the Blu-rays or the DVDs. And he said, "Oh, he's here." And so I ended up. I've interviewed this guy on over the phone, and he's an Oscar winner. And I thought he'd just say, "Yeah," and I just got a bit bored of it all and retired. And he just said, "No, I found it difficult to get work in the past 15 years because for various reasons." And you think, "Oh God!" So actually, a lot of people, God bless Doctor Who, are quite pleased that you remember them. And in fact, I know for a fact that some actors haven't got proper obituaries in The Guardian because I'll email The Guardian and go, you should do one on this person. And their family have gone, yeah, my dad was a bit of an actor, so can we write a little tribute and Other Lives? And Other Lives is not quite the same as a big proper obituary. So they sort of undersell their relative. Peter Halliday, who was a fabulous actor who, had lead roles on television. He got one done by his family, sort of saying, when he worked with Sean Connery once and it was really nice, you go, no, he's Peter Halliday, but they don't see him as Peter Halliday, or whatever. So for a lot of these people that I was sort of approaching very humbly and going, oh, I hope you don't mind, can I talk to you? Are like, what? Why would anyone want to talk to me? This is amazing. So because a lot of them are much later in life, they haven't got anything to hide. They haven't got any need to big themselves up unnecessarily. So I think they're not trying to sell anything. So you just get. I've been very lucky that everyone that's agreed to be interviewed by me as well. They're doing it for free. They do it for lunch. So there's no commercial element to it. So they're only doing it if they want to. So you've got a willing participant who's being totally honest and has no agenda, and who is quite pleased to have the chance to chat. So you sort of just get honesty and relaxation. And I think there's going to be some really interesting stories to tell about New Who that we're not in a position to tell yet because most of the movers and shakers are still working in television. So you're not going to get, and this isn't to denigrate anybody, but you're not going to get a totally honest appraisal just yet because there are certain professional sensibilities and relationships to cover. So I look forward to, in my bath chair, ringing up the director of photography of, I don't know, the Long Game or whatever, and going, so what was that like? So what makes a good interview is I think just no agenda and I sort of gameness on the part of the interviewee and just innate character. Sometimes some people are just fascinating and good conversationalists. But actors most actors are pretty good at that anyway, because they, as I'm probably demonstrating here, most actors don't have much trouble talking about themselves. To my shame.
However, you don't just talk to actors, you talk to lots of people. I mean, Who's Round is dedicated to talking to someone from every Doctor Who story. Yeah. It doesn't matter if they're an actor or not. And there's been plenty of non-actors as well. Do you find it more difficult to draw out behind-the-scenes crew?
No, well, I lucked out there because Margot Hayhoe, who was production manager and assistant floor manager for most of the the first 5 Doctors. I think her first story was The War Machines and her last was Snake Dance maybe, but she certainly popped up a lot. She did Ambassadors of Death and she did Fury from the Deep and various. Lovely Margot. And she'd done a few things. She'd been interviewed before and I'd met her at a BBC thing, and I'd got her details. She was fairly easy to find, and I had a lovely time with Margot. And she basically did a spreadsheet of the stories that I'd still got available, and did a list of people who she knew from the production side, because she's still in touch with and actors too, saying who she knew, who she thought might do it, and who was close to London or Manchester, so that it would be geographically possible for me to do. So she then opened me up, and that had a bit of a domino effect to people like Sue Upton and Marcia Wheeler, who'd not been interviewed before, who both had brilliant careers within the BBC and worked across a lot of who's, but who, and I think I'm more naturally drawn to doing actors as well, because I have a little bit of common ground. But that, I thought, really opened Who's Round up, and interviewed people who quite often don't make the interviews in Doctor Who magazine or whatever, and even on some of the DVDs. If you've got Terence Dix and Barry Letts, they didn't tend to go often much further behind the scenes than that. But actually, your production manager is somebody across the cast, across the location, across what's going on in the production office and on the floor and on location. And so I got some great stories from those sorts of people. And I would like to think that then Marcia, who's been on a lot of the DVDs now, being very, very helpful, who hadn't been on them until I'd done that interview with her, migrated across to the range, to the benefit of us all. But that was through Margot basically being a very efficient production manager and doing me a spreadsheet with all practical necessities sort of covered. So that, and I was really excited when that happened, actually, because I hadn't anticipated it going that way, because again, it's relatively easy for me to get hold of actors, because usually somebody knows somebody else. Lisa Bowerman was very helpful because she knows everybody. So
she does.
So I just looked at her Facebook friends and said, they've all been in Doctor Who. And she just went, all right, I'll ask him. And she said, I also know this camp cyber leader, Christopher Robbie. I went, yep, I'll have him. And Christopher Robbie isn't camp, but his cyber leader is. So Lisa was very helpful in the early days of that as well. But it was, just lots of, and some bits of coincidence. In fact, I got Richard Martin because Liz Carr, who's a comedian and actor friend of mine, she just saw that I was doing it. She said, "Oh, he used to teach me at drama school." So, I got him through no Doctor Who connections at all. So lots of coincidence and fortune, and sometimes just, even somebody like Victor's Wright-Ellis. I found a contact for him on Skype, actually. I thought, well, that's got to be I doubt there are any other Victor's Wright-Ellises who I knew lived in a certain part of the world. So I just sent him a message via there, and he bit, So sometimes it was just chancing your arm.
Is he still around?
Yeah.
I remember Victor. We used to he came to a few events in Sydney, didn't he, Philip?
Yeah, he's still there. Yeah, yeah. Take a camera to him. He's great.
So, can you give a little bit of a plot history in terms of where you've come from? Because you're a trained actor originally, but I know you're doing stand-up, you've done the Who's Round, you've done lots of stuff for Big Finish and other things, and now, of course, you're on podcast and still other acting stuff. What do you classify yourself in terms of career-wise? And, just a bit of, what came first and how? I mean, how Who's Round set up and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm essentially a failure who keeps himself busy with his hobby, and it sort of paid off. I'm an actor, really. At college, I was the Shakespeare guy. But just towards the end of my time as a student, a friend of mine put on a stand-up night and asked if I fancied a go. And I went, yeah, sure, and thought no more of it till he showed me a flyer with my name on. And I did a gig, and a load of friends of mine came along to support, and I had a good gig. I thought, oh, okay, that's quite fun. I'd always quite enjoyed public speaking, So I sort of dabbled in stand-up, and when I left, when I, found myself out in the big wide world, I started doing stand-up because a few people had offered me money to do it. So I built up, and then I started doing a regular weekly slot, which exceeded my expectations. But all of that was through me really not knowing what I was doing, because I didn't know what I was doing. There weren't any great odds to it being a success or a failure, so it didn't really matter. So it got successful sort of without me realising it. With this night I still do in Manchester called Excess Malarkey every Tuesday. So that kept me busy and employed as a performer. And I was doing bits and bobs of acting, trying to break into theatre, and I broke into the Royal Exchange Theatre and did a few productions there, and then trying to get a bit of telly, and I did bits and bobs of telly, but it was all sort of scratching about. And then I did, but I was doing okay. And I was certainly working very regularly as a stand-up, and voiceovers too, and radio drama. And then I did a one-man show in Edinburgh, Moths Ate My Doctor Who Scarf, where I used all the skills I'd accrued as a stand-up. And I'd been a stand-up for quite a long time before taking a show to Edinburgh, which most people get a bit hungry. But again, because I sort of considered myself a bit of an imposter, and I'd sort of fallen into stand-up by mistake, I thought, well, I'll always just muddle along. I'll never play the Comedy Store. Then I ended up being a resident MC at the Comedy Store. And, I figure I've got as high as I can as a stand-up. I've closed the Comedy Store, which, I've not made it go out of business. I mean, I've headlined a show, but I got the hankering to do Edinburgh, and my friend said, "Oh well, do what you know, do a Doctor Who show," and that was just about when Doctor Who was coming back, and so I timed it quite right that I did it at the just after, it was the August after David Tennant's first season, so Doctor Who had been back a couple of years and was on everybody's lips. And I also, it was his advice again, my friend who ended up directing my show, Mark, who said, this show's great, but take out all the jokes that will only appeal to Doctor Who fans. Make this a show that's accessible to non-Doctor Who people. And that then sort of took off. So that's then how I came to the attention of the DVD people. So then I had this sort of bit where I suddenly was a Doctor Who guy, for better or worse, which was very nice. A comedian, somebody who could string a sentence together and I demonstrated within the show that, I hadn't jumped on the Doctor Who bandwagon. I earned my stripes in terms of knowing the names of all the actors and that sort of thing. And then, so I started doing stuff for the DVD range, and then I was going through a divorce, and having quite a miserable time of it at the end of 2012. And somebody on Twitter said, my wish for the anniversary year is that Toby Hadoke interviews everyone from Doctor Who. And I was in need of something to do. I was abject. It was New Year's Eve around then, and I was feeling terrible. My life was not great at all. I was at my mum's house and was sort of facing a very uncertain personal future, and I wasn't very well physically either. And I just latched onto that, and I just went, well, yeah, I could. Why don't I try and interview one person from every story? And I sort of added Big Finish into it, or maybe the other person did. And Nick Briggs said, yeah, we'll put it out, because I didn't have a clue then. I thought putting podcasts out must be some great major technological operation. I've learned now that even I can do it. And so that was, I basically got through my sort of year of going through a divorce, of instead of disappearing into the bottom of a whiskey bottle and smashing my head against a brick wall, I gave myself something to do, which was to overcome my fear of phoning people and setting up interviews and doing it, because I'm quite nervous at doing all of that sort of stuff. It makes me feel physically sick. You wouldn't know it from the amount I'm talking at you now, but the idea of making contact and doing all that sort of thing, I find terribly nerve-wracking. I have to overcome a lot of fear to do that. But I made myself do it as a way of sort of channeling whatever it was that was going on. So I did Who's Round at a time of great sort of personal unhappiness, and it kind of gave me a project. I find if I've got something to focus on, it keeps away all the outside noise, and I focus, as we've demonstrated, in quite a lot of detail. But that's just because of where the I am, I guess. So I did that, and then. And so now I sort of balance the Doctor Who-y stuff, and I set up the podcasts during lockdown. But between my other work, I've had a really nice stint in Coronation Street over here last year. I don't know what's happening with that. They don't tell you anything. But I've been in and out of that, and I do a lot of radio drama, and I still do the stand-up. Though as I'm getting older now, I travel around the country less than I would have been inclined to do back in the day. But for years, while I was doing all of the Doctor Who stuff, I was doing weekends at every major comedy club in the UK, and that was my living, really. yelling at drunk people on a Friday night. So it's been a mosaic of lots of different things. Jack of all trades, master of none, I think is the phrase.
So was setting up the podcast sort of something born of necessity due to the pandemic, something you had to do while there was less work in acting?
Yeah, well, it wasn't that there was less work. We were quite lucky because actually I probably worked more in lockdown before, because that's when I got the gig on Coronation Street, and actually a lot of it was filmed in my house. But in a way that they've never done, which as a TV historian was very exciting, because they've never done that before, where they sent us the equipment and we set it up, and they sort of called the shots remotely. So it was as a part of TV history, that was quite fun. But we were doing I had noticed that I think the lockdown was very good for communities, support group type communities, and the comedy club that I run, Excess Malarkey, has never been a sort of mainstream concern. It's won loads of awards and it's always pretty busy. Comedy clubs aren't as busy now as they were back in the day. I mean, we used to sell out every week, but we still do okay on a Tuesday night. But we're non-profit making, and we always have a place for slightly more eclectic acts. I think we're a bit more diverse, perhaps, than some of the sort of more mainstream Friday night, Saturday night gigs that are the bread and butter gigs. But there's a practical necessity for that. They cater for large crowds, and they have stag do's and hen do's and office parties, which we don't have. So our Tuesday night gig is quite a nice sort of community type of things, and it draws to it, perhaps slightly more misfitty people, or not socially robust people, or people who aren't out in big rowdy groups or whatever. And so we found when we went online, we were at a real advantage, because all the comedy clubs tried online gigs and they pretty much all stopped, and we didn't. And I'm very proud of the fact that we also paid 4 comics every Tuesday a full fee to perform on our online shows. That was paid for by donations from the people watching. So not only did we provide, hopefully, laughter and a bit of what I hadn't anticipated, because I thought, well, people can watch Netflix or whatever. It was people watching the live experience and people typing in, and I didn't want to look at the comments because I thought people would just be going, oh, who's that tit or whatever. But actually people were bantering with each other, and it was suddenly heckles were welcome, because actually that was part of the experience of the people watching. So somebody from Australia could be chatting to somebody from Wigan about what they're watching from the act now, and that totally unexpected me. And what I hadn't expected was, because it was live, it was a communal experience in a way that Netflix is not. So there were all sorts of. I thought we'd do a few online shows, and they'd not continue because it was too much. People wouldn't want to do it. In fact, we kept going through the whole of lockdown. We paid 4 acts every week, and we got some really good audiences and lovely feedback. But the lovely thing about that was we felt that we were part of bringing people together. And then when Emily Cook did the tweet-alongs, that felt like the Doctor Who community was doing that. And when you're not very good at doing anything practical, which I'm not, I can't go and help somebody build something or design. I thought, well, what can I do? I can talk out loud about Doctor Who. Well, maybe if I do a podcast, that will be some sort of form of entertainment, or something that will help lift the spirits or do whatever we're trying to do in lockdown for people in the sort of Doctor Who community. So therefore there will be an interest in it. Nobody wants to talk into midair. So I thought, well, at least there'll be something, at least there seems to be some people out there who might welcome this. So why not have a go? Because because I can, I could set up a studio relatively easy, blah, blah, blah. I thought it would be harder to do a podcast. I looked into it and realized, oh no, that's actually quite straightforward. So I just went for it. But yeah, it was born out of, well, this is what lockdown is. If I don't do it now, I never will. Why not? There's not much else going on. Why not do it and see what comes of it? And I found it thoroughly rewarding, I have to say. But yeah, it was definitely bred from lockdown.
Excellent. And now you're the yardstick for every other Doctor Who podcaster there. We're watching you on the charts, and if we ever get inside of you, we're feeling very, very privileged indeed.
Oh, really? Well, I don't look at the charts. I didn't know there are charts. Well, that's good. Well, again, I'm slightly lucky in that I have a, I've had exposure through the Blu-rays and the DVDs and stuff. So I think that gives me a little bit of a, and the stuff I do on BBC Radio 4 Extra, that gives you a little bit of a platform. So I knew that I could rely on certain people would help me out by contributing or by spreading the word. But it's very rewarding too. And I wanted to do stuff that was all entirely positive as well. But there's some great Doctor Who podcasts out there, as you know. It's a really fertile area, and lots of people go into different areas within Doctor Who that they specialise in, which I think is great. And I'm all for again, creative endeavour. Anything that Doctor Who does to inspire people to create something makes the world a better place, even if only in a little way. But as we know, small beautiful things is what life is all about.
Coming soon from Big Finish Productions, Doctor Who, The Fourth Doctor Adventures, Casualties of Time.
You really believed your pathetic attempts to elude me had any effect at all? I've been watching you, and this is the moment to exact my revenge.
So you're going on a long trip, Doctor, and by the time it's over, my power and reputation will be unassailable. I'm just here for the ride.
What ride would that be, Cuthbert?
The one where you chase me all over the place, wondering what the heck's going on.
What have you done with Romana?
I believe she represents our only chance of preventing the whole of history from unravelling.
Earth before 1859. Cuthbert's plan, it went back much further than 1859.
Everyone, out of the train! Hands up!
So that means Cuthbert has got himself another quantum gateway.
That infernal time engine has revealed to us the full extent of the conglomerate's influence on universal history. There's a clear thread of philanthropy and compassion running through all of the corporation's activities. Sectors, open fire!
Under fire! Under fire!
He's the Black Guardian.
The time is approaching!
The time is approaching. The time is approaching.
Big Finish. We love stories.
Thanks very much, Toby. We really appreciate you coming on and sticking around for our recommendations for this week. I'd love to let you go first, but I can't let you go first because, as our regular listeners know, it's always Philip's turn.
Yeah, lucky me.
Go, Philip.
Excellent. I had computer issues. I had it up on my screen, but eventually it's come down. So you're going to remind me what I was listening to. I was going to recommend from Tom Baker's second season with Mary Tam. There's a series of audios with David Warner and Toby Hadoke, who playing sidekicks to each other. And I can't remember off the top of my head their name.
Mr. Dorrick.
Oh, that's the character's name, but the episode it's
Sands of Life, War Against the Lan, Dalek Contract, Final Phase,
exactly.
The Shoot of History, Casualties of Time.
Oh, there's 6 of them.
There is 6. I think there was another season.
It is because it's Mary Tam. There's 4, is there? And then another 2 later.
Yes,
on.
and then with Lala Ward, I think there's another couple.
Yeah, that's right. So can I just say that those are fantastic episodes? I mean, yeah, David Warner, everything he does is brilliant. But actually, what was it like working with David, Toby?
Oh well, that was a treat because that had been another time when I'd be going, I'm for Big Finish for a while. Maybe they think I'm the worst actor in the world. And then I just got a message saying, we're planning a new Tom Baker series. And I think this was when Tom Baker hadn't been announced, or certainly I don't think had done anything for Big Finish. And we've got this idea for this pair of villains, which would be you and David Warner. Are you interested? And David Warner had always been my favourite non-Doctor Who actor as a kid. I loved his performances in things like The Man with Two Brains and Cross of Iron, in which he gives a fantastic sort of glassy-eyed performance as this shell of a man who James Mason decides is the hope for Germany's future. He's a brilliant actor. Straw Dogs, all sorts. But now I don't know about the timeline of it because I had met him when I'd been in doing one called Unintelligent Design, which was a play that Geoffrey Beevers had written.
Yeah.
And it was a three-hander with myself, Geoffrey Beevers, and Daisy Ashford that Lisa Bauman had directed. And I think David came in to do an uncredited turn as the voice of God or something at the end. But Lisa, I think, had cottoned on to the fact that David Warner had a very special place in my sort of acting Hall of Fame. So when he came in, and I said, "Oh, very nice to meet you," he sort of patted the sofa and sort of went, "It's all right, you can sit down and talk to me." And I sat down and talked to him about all sorts of his movies, and he was so I think he'd been primed, do you know what I mean? So he was so nice. And then, yeah, to get the chance to work with him. I mean, you say it's a sort of pair of lids. I mean, it's very much, I think, it's David Warner and his sort of Uriah Heep, Mr. Fibuli type of sidekick. Mr. Dorrick is very much a yes sir, no sir, 3 parsecs, a port, a starboard, sir. We did all that with Tom Baker, and Hayley Atwell was there that first day as well. But David Warner is so nice. He wears, for somebody who plays such sometimes intense and powerful characters, or such haunted characters who have, a real sort of depth about them, he's a very sort of light and easygoing and very down to earth fellow, and I just loved working with him and listening to him work. And it's one of those moments you go, I'm in a scene with Tom Baker and David Warner, and me this isn't. I mean, if you told my 10-year-old self that, he would have thought, well, you don't need to do anything else. You'll be happy for the rest of your life. Obviously, life is much more complicated than that. But it's worth reminding yourself sometimes that you go, actually, I'd have taken that 30 years ago. I'd have taken that as a okay, you've done okay. It was a real privilege, and then it was really nice that they brought us back as well. It was great fun to do. Although, Mr. Dorrick is he's Doctor Who has had its fair share of snivelling sidekicks.
Well, works well. So that's Toby. Is there anything you've been listening to or watching that you'd like to recommend?
Yes, well, I have been listening to, which I think is a great idea for a podcast, and I was on it recently, but that's not the reason I'm recommending it. It's called Looks Unfamiliar. And there's a chap called Tim Worthington, who is one of us, Doctor Who fan, but he interviews various people like me, but people like Grace Dent and Mitch Benn, and interesting writers and cultural commentators and people like that, about things that they remember from their childhood that they think that everybody else seems to have forgotten. So it could be a chocolate bar or a television program or something, and you think there's nothing you've forgotten, and then you listen to people talking, and you go, "Oh God, yeah, I remember those." But of course, then they go into a bit of detail about what they were and blah blah. And sometimes they can't find the thing, and sometimes you learn an awful lot about that program that you have vague recollections of, and it all starts. And it's a great one for sort of opening up little portals in your brain that you'd thought were closed or hadn't realised could be opened, and you go, "Oh yeah, I remember that." And it's such a great idea for a podcast to have things that are sort of vaguely half remembered from your youth, if you're a particular generation. So I listen to that a lot. Looks Unfamiliar, which I think is a good podcast for people who like Doctor Who and surrounding ephemera.
Sounds great. And what about you, Dwayne? What are you going to recommend?
Well, I have to recommend something that Toby has appeared in too, because I was listening to it today, just to get warmed up for this. It was Robophobia. Robots of Death was number 1 in my off-air TV recorded collection on my beta cassettes. So I always love anything to do with Kaldor and the Robots of Death. So and of course, this is the first appearance of Nicola Walker as Liv Chanka. It was interesting to hear her in the extras saying, "Gee, it'd be nice if this was a recurring character." This is back in 2011, and of course, here she is, nearly a dozen years later, still playing the same role that she started back then. So that was and Toby, you had an interesting role in that, because you could say that you were a villain, but were you?
Yes.
It was a bit more complex than just a straight villain.
I don't know. She clearly did something right that day, and I didn't, because Farrell, Security Chief Farrell, has never been back. Yeah, that was nice, actually. And in fact, most of the cast of that were Doctor Who fans. So we were all chatting away, and you could see Nicola Walker was looking around going, have I got myself? She said, I don't know any of this. It's like, no, you're all right. You're here because you're here because you're a highly acclaimed actress. We just happen to all be Doctor Who fans. But you could see her going, are you supposed to have a certain amount of knowledge before you come and do one? Because it was me, Dan Starkey, Nick Pegg, everybody there.
John Dorney was there.
Yeah, everyone was a Doctor Who fan, and even Matt Addis, who'd been an old university mate of mine. He knows a bit. Was he a well? I mean, all baddies think they have motivation. I wish I had a couple more scenes in that where I didn't have to yell at people. I think I'm quite shouty in that, which is a shame, because I'm very pleased with the work in the last episode. I was very happy with that, how that came out, because that's quite hard to do on audio. When you're on screen, you can just have tears falling out of your eyes. But doing that vocally and I did when I was doing it, but you can't see that, so you have to try and sort of reflect that vocally as well without it sounding ghastly. And they were really nicely written scenes, because you had these terrible flashbacks where Farrell's motivation was revealed, and Nick Briggs was very nice about that. I was very pleased with that, because also because I tend to get a lot of the parts I go up for tend to be sort of slightly comedic, and every comedian fancies themselves as somebody terribly serious. So it's nice that Nick went to me, with a far sort of straighter, slightly grumpier, but shouty commander type of part, but that had all these depths that were revealed in the last episode. I really enjoyed that. It was a really nice one to do, and a good part. Yeah. But is he a bad? I mean, he is a baddie. He does bad things. He justifies them, but all baddies justify. Everybody who does terrible things thinks they're doing good things, which is a lesson for our time.
It is.
Absolutely. All right, that's my recommendation, and appreciate your recommendations, guys, and especially you, Toby. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been wonderful to chat with you.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
All right, we'll catch you all next time, guys.
See you later.
This has been the Sirens of Audio episode 117. Commentary on Commentary, with our guest Toby Hadoke and your hosts Philip Edney and Dwayne Bunny. Original theme music composed by Joe Kramer. Contact us or check out all our details at sirensofaudio.com. You can drop us a line at sirensofaudio@gmail.com or post a comment on our socials or our YouTube channel and let us know your thoughts on this or any one of our episodes. Thanks for listening, audiophiles. We'll hear you next time.